February 17th, 1952/10:14 p.m. Red Rooster, Harlem. The cigarette smoke hung in the air like a shroud, catching the low, amber light of the club in lazy, swirling patterns. On stage, a woman sang the blues, her voice a river of molasses and heartache that flowed over the clinking glasses and murmuring patrons. At his usual table in the back, tucked into a deep red leather booth, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson held court. He didn't need a throne. The booth, the deference in the bartender's eyes, the way men of influence angled their bodies toward him even from across the room, that was his throne room. He was a man carved from the very granite of Harlem, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles, his eyes holding the quiet, heavy authority of a king who knew the price of his crown. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the ice cracking with a sound like a distant gunshot. It was a sound he was intimately familiar with. Junie Bird, his shadow and his shield, stood a respectable 3 feet away, his gaze sweeping the room with a practiced, almost bored intensity. Nothing escaped Junie. Not the tourist who'd had one too many, nor the numbers runner trying to catch Bumpy's eye for a nod of approval. Words coming up from downtown. "Bumpy," Junie said, his voice a low rumble that barely disturbed the air. He leaned in, the scent of his cologne and the faint smell of gun oil a familiar combination. The spaghetti eaters are chattering. Bumpy didn't look at him. He continued watching the singer, his finger tracing the rim of his glass. "They're always chattering, Junie. It's what they do. They talk, we work. This ain't the usual chatter," Junie pressed. "This is different. Louder. It's about Genovese." At the name, a flicker of something cold passed through Bumpy's eyes. Vito Genovese. A snake with a global reach. Bumpy had danced with the Italians for years, a complex ballet of territory, tribute, and thinly veiled threats. But Vito was different. More ambitious, more ruthless. He saw the world as something to be devoured, and Harlem was a juicy, unclaimed morsel in his eyes. "What about him?" Bumpy asked, his voice still level, betraying nothing. "He's back from his hearing in Italy. Mad as a hornet. They're saying he's looking to clean house, consolidate, take everything. And he's starting with the competition he can't control." Junie paused, letting the weight of the unspoken settle. "He's starting with you." A young man named Spider, one of Bumpy's up-and-coming lieutenants, slid into the booth opposite him, his face pale and slick with sweat despite the cool night. He was breathing hard, as if he'd run all the way from 110th Street. "Boss," he stammered, his eyes wide. I just came from a sit-down with a guy who runs with Sally Boy's crew. He owed me. He paid." Bumpy finally turned his head, his gaze pinning Spider to the leather seat. "Paid with what, son?" Spider swallowed hard. "With news. It's all over the 5 boroughs. Vito, he put a price on your head." The club's noise seemed to fade into a dull roar in Bumpy's ears. The singer's voice became a distant wail. He could feel Junie stiffen beside him. "A price," Bumpy repeated, the words tasting like ash. It wasn't a new concept, but coming from Genovese, it carried the weight of an army. "How much?" Junie demanded, his hand instinctively moving to the inside of his jacket. Spider looked like he was about to be sick. $75,000, boss. 75 grand. To anyone. A wire from Sicily confirmed it. It's open season. $75,000. In 1952, that was a fortune. It was buy a new life money. It was forget your loyalties money. It was enough to turn every hungry gun, every desperate hood, every ambitious punk from New York to Chicago into a potential assassin. It wasn't just a threat. It was a citywide invitation to murder. Bumpy's face remained a mask of stone, but inside, a tectonic plate had shifted. This wasn't business. This wasn't a dispute over a few points on the numbers racket. This was an eradication order. Genovese didn't want to negotiate. He wanted a funeral. His funeral. He thought of his brownstone on St. Nicholas Avenue. He thought of the scent of his wife Mamie's perfume on his pillows. He thought of his daughter Elise, her small hand in his, her absolute and unwavering belief that her father was the strongest man in the world, a man who could fix any problem and slay any dragon. And in that moment, the King of Harlem, the man who held the lives of thousands in his hands, felt a profound, sickening powerlessness. The $75,000 wasn't just on his head. It was a bounty on his daughter's peace of mind, on his wife's future, on the fragile sanctuary he had built for them in the heart of a violent world. The assassins wouldn't just be coming for him. They would be coming for his home. They would be coming for his family. He slowly pushed his chair back, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that cut through the restored noise of the club. The blues singer was finishing her set. The song was about a woman losing her man. "Junie," Bumpy said, his voice now a blade of ice. "Get the car. Tell Eddie and Fats to meet us at the house. No stops." He looked at Spider, whose face was still ashen. "Spider, go home. Lock your doors. Don't talk to anyone. This conversation never happened." Spider nodded, scrambling out of the booth. Bumpy stood, buttoning his jacket. He was still the picture of control, a man of immense and terrible presence. But Junie, who had known him for 20 years, saw it. A slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his hat. A new, haunted depth in his eyes. The king was still on his throne, but the castle walls were crumbling. The dragons were at the gate, and they were coming for everything he loved. February 18th, 1952/1:32 a.m./Bumpy's residence, St. Nicholas Avenue. The heavy oak door of the brownstone closed with a dead, final thud, shutting out the murmuring city. Inside, the silence was heavier. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and Mamie's roses, a domestic tranquility that felt obscene in the face of the news Bumpy carried like a shroud. He stood in the foyer, the ornate chandelier overhead casting a warm, golden light that seemed to mock the cold dread coiling in his gut. Mamie came down the grand staircase, her silk robe whispering against the steps. Her face, usually a mask of serene strength, was etched with worry. She had seen him arrive with Junie and two of his heaviest hitters flanking him like grim specters. She knew. "Ellsworth, what is it?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. He wanted to lie. He wanted to conjure a story about a business deal gone south, a problem he already had under control. But looking at her, at the woman who had stood by him through prison bids and street wars, he found he couldn't. The lie wouldn't form. "It's Genovese," he said, his voice raw. He walked past her into the living room, a cavernous space filled with fine furniture and art he'd collected over the years. It was a testament to his success, a fortress of prosperity. Tonight, it felt like a gilded cage. He put a contract out. Mamie followed him, her steps silent on the thick Persian rug. She didn't ask how much. She didn't ask why. She understood the brutal calculus of their lives. She just asked the only question that mattered. "What does this mean for us?" For Elise. Bumpy loosened his tie, his fingers feeling clumsy and thick. He stared at the mantelpiece, at the silver-framed photograph of Elise on her 5th birthday, her smile a beacon of pure, uncomplicated joy. "It means the war has come home, Mamie." Junie remained by the door, a silent sentinel. He was giving his boss space, but he was also there to bear witness. It was his role. He'd seen Bumpy face down killers, stare into the barrel of a gun without flinching. He'd seen him command a room of the most dangerous men in New York with a single, quiet word. He had never seen him like this. Bumpy walked over to the liquor cabinet, his movements stiff. He poured a brandy, his hand shaking so slightly it was almost imperceptible. But Junie saw it. He saw the tremor. He saw the deep, ragged breath Bumpy took, a breath that wasn't just tired but scared. The godfather of Harlem was scared. Not for himself. For them. "She's sleeping," Mamie said, her gaze following his to the photograph. "She had a nightmare earlier. I told her Daddy was here, so there were no monsters to be afraid of." The words struck Bumpy like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, the brandy glass cold in his hand. He was the monster they should be afraid of. His life, his choices, had summoned this. He had built a kingdom on violence and fear, and now its walls were turning inward, threatening to consume the one thing he had built it all to protect. He walked to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain a fraction of an inch. He scanned the dark, tree-lined street below. Every shadow seemed to hold a man with a gun. Every parked car was a potential coffin. Suddenly, a deafening bang ripped through the night's quiet. The sound was sharp, concussive. A gunshot. Close. Bumpy didn't think. He reacted. In a split second, the terrified father vanished and the kingpin took over. He dropped the brandy glass, which shattered on the floor, and spun away from the window, pulling a .38 special from a holster at the small of his back with a single fluid motion. "Get down," he roared at Mamie. Junie already had his own weapon out, moving to cover the front door, his body low. "Fats, Eddie, front and back," he yelled into the foyer. Mamie stifled a scream and dropped behind the sofa. The idyllic domestic scene had exploded into a combat zone in the space of a heartbeat. The air crackled with tension, thick with the metallic smell of adrenaline. Bumpy's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. "They're here. They found us. The first one is here." He imagined a spray of bullets tearing through the window, through the walls, ripping apart his home, his family. His mind flashed to Elise's room upstairs. Another bang pop bang, followed by the squeal of tires. Bumpy crouched, moving along the wall toward the staircase, his gun held in a two-handed grip. He had to get to Elise. Nothing else mattered. The $75,000 wasn't a bounty anymore. It was a death sentence for his little girl. Then, silence. A long, ringing silence broken only by their harsh breathing and the distant siren that was a constant part of Harlem's nightly symphony. Nothing happened. No more shots. No shattering glass. No men storming the door. Junie, inching toward the front window, peered cautiously through the blinds. He stayed there for a full minute before turning back, his face grim but relieved. A car. An old Ford. Backfired twice and took off. Kid, driving it, looked scared to death of the noise it made. A backfire. The adrenaline drained out of Bumpy as if a plug had been pulled. His legs felt weak. The .38 in his hand suddenly weighed 100 pounds. He leaned his forehead against the cool plaster of the wall, his shoulders slumping. He had been ready to kill, ready to die, to turn his home into a slaughterhouse. And for what? A faulty engine. A piece of junk car. The false alarm was worse than an actual attack. It was a preview. It was a taste of the paranoia that would now be their constant companion. He wouldn't be able to hear a car backfire, a dish drop, a door slam, without this same icy dread seizing his heart. He didn't realize he was shaking until Mamie's hand was on his arm. He looked down and saw his whole body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. He slid down the wall to a sitting position, the gun resting limply on his knee. He put his head in his hands, the image of Elise's smiling face in the photograph burning in his mind. He didn't make a sound, but his shoulders heaved with a silent, racking sob of pure, desperate fear. Witness testimony, Junie Bird. I was there that night. Stood by the door, my Roscoe in my hand, ready for war. I'd seen Bumpy in every situation you can imagine. I seen him face down Dutch Schultz's boys with nothing but a pocket knife and a mean look. I seen him walk into a room of 5 gunmen and walk out with their money and their dignity. The man was made of iron. But that night, after the car backfired, I saw the iron melt. He didn't cry, not with noise. It was quieter than that. Deeper. He just broke. For a minute, he wasn't Bumpy Johnson, the boss of Harlem. He was just a father who knew the whole world was coming to kill him, and he was terrified that his little girl would get caught in the crossfire. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about territory anymore. This was about survival, and I knew he would burn the entire city to the ground to keep his family safe. I saw the King of Harlem shake, and God help the men who made him feel that way. February 18th, 1952, 9 a.m. office above the Plantation Club, 125th Street. The sun streamed through the grimy windows of Bumpy's office, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The office was a command center, Spartan and functional. A heavy desk, a few chairs, a telephone, and a map of Harlem on the wall, dotted with pins marking his various interests. But this morning, it was a war room. Bumpy stood before the map, his back to the dozen men assembled in the room. They were his lieutenants, his enforcers, the hardened core of his organization. Men like Finley, a lanky numbers genius, Geechee, a bear of a man who ran his protection rackets, and a dozen others whose loyalty had been forged in fire and blood. There was no coffee, no idle chatter. The air was thick with tension, sharp as a razor's edge. Bumpy had not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was devoid of any of the vulnerability Junie had witnessed just hours before. It was flat, cold, and absolute. Last night, Vito Genovese declared war. He began, turning to face them. His gaze swept across the room, meeting each man's eyes. He has offered $75,000 to any man who puts a bullet in my head. This is not an insult. It is an extermination order. And it is a mistake. He thinks he can reach into my home, into Harlem, and take what is mine. He thinks our strength is in our pockets. He is about to learn that our strength is in our streets. Our strength is this room. He paused, letting the words sink in. This bounty brings the wolves to our door. Every two-bit hood, every hitman from the sticks, every greedy bastard with a gun and no conscience is on his way here. They will not see me as a man. They will see me as a walking bank vault. They will be careless. They will be hungry. And we will be waiting. He turned back to the map. Junie. Boss, Junie said, stepping forward. Shut it down, Bumpy commanded. The whole operation. Numbers, dope, protection. Everything. Effective immediately. All our resources, all our men, have one job and one job only. Hunting. I want every new face in Harlem accounted for. I want eyes on every train station, every bus depot, every bridge and tunnel coming into Manhattan. I want our people in the flop houses, the bars, the brothels, listening. These men will need a place to sleep, a woman, a drink. They will talk. And when they do, I want to know. He picked up a red pin from the desk. This isn't about defense. We are not waiting for them to come to us. We are going to them. We will find every single one of these assassins, and we will make them disappear. We will send a message back to Genovese written in the blood of his hired guns. He wanted a war. We will give him a massacre. The countdown had begun. It wasn't a clock on the wall, but a number in his head. How many would come? The street said dozens. The whispers grew with every hour. Bumpy's network, a complex web of informants, dealers, prostitutes, and working men, was activated. Harlem, which had always been his kingdom, now became his fortress and his hunting ground. February 20th, 1952/4:17 p.m. / a tenement roof, 112th Street. The first one was a punk from Jersey. A kid named Mickey, no older than 20. He thought he was smart. He'd been watching Bumpy's route from his office to the Red Rooster for 2 days from a rooftop, a scoped rifle in a beat-up violin case. He was so focused on his target, he never thought to watch his own back. Geechee and 2 of his boys came up the fire escape behind him. They didn't make a sound. Mickey the punk vanished. The only thing left behind was the violin case. Assassin number 1 vanished. February 22nd, 1952/11:03 p.m. / a dockside bar, Hell's Kitchen. The next 2 were professionals, brothers from Chicago known for their work with the outfit. They were holed up in a dive bar near the docks, planning their approach. They made the mistake of trying to recruit a local wheelman, a guy who occasionally did jobs for one of Bumpy's Irish contacts. The wheelman took their advance money, made a phone call, and told them to meet him by Pier 81 at midnight. The brothers waited. The wheelman never showed. But 4 dark sedans did. The brothers from Chicago were never seen again. The Hudson River was cold and deep. Assassins number 2 and number 3 vanished. The hunt was relentless, methodical. Bumpy orchestrated it from his office, a grim puppet master pulling strings all over the city. His map became a graveyard of red pins. A hitman from Detroit was picked up at Penn Station. A crew of 3 from Philadelphia were lured into a warehouse in the Bronx for a phony arms deal. A lone wolf from New Orleans was found in his hotel room, a needle in his arm that wasn't his own. Bumpy's men were efficient. They were ghosts. There were no bodies, no shootouts, no headlines in the daily news. Just whispers on the street. Men were arriving in New York to collect a fortune, and they were simply ceasing to exist. The city's underworld began to buzz with a new kind of fear. The $75,000 bounty was starting to look less like an opportunity and more like a death trap. Genovese's assassins were being hunted by an invisible army, swallowed whole by the city itself. Bumpy was turning Genovese's power against him, using the greed of his hired killers as bait. The hunters had become the hunted. The tension in Harlem was suffocating. The entire neighborhood was a loaded gun, and Bumpy's finger was on the trigger. February 29th, 1952/2:45 a.m. / abandoned laundry, East Harlem. The tip came from a junkie who owed Finley's bookie more than he could ever repay. A new face, a white man with dead eyes and a southern accent, had taken a room in the back of a derelict, rat-infested building that used to be a Chinese laundry. He paid in cash, carried a heavy satchel, and never came out during the day. He fit the profile. "Let me send Geechee and his crew." "Bumpy," Junie insisted, standing by the car on a dark, deserted street. The air smelled of garbage and rain. "This is what they're paid for. You don't need to be here." Bumpy shook his head, checking the action on his .38. "This one," the junkie said. He was asking questions. "Not about me, about my family. About Mamie's church. About Elisa's school." The words hung in the cold air. This was different. The others had been hunting a target. This man was hunting a life. "I need to see him," Junie. Bumpy said, his voice low and dangerous. "I need to look this one in the eye." He left Junie with the car and moved toward the laundry alone, melting into the shadows. The building was a carcass, its windows boarded up or smashed out like vacant eyes. He slipped through a busted side door into a darkness that was absolute. The stench of mildew, decay, and something sour, like old sweat and despair, hit him like a wall. He moved with the practiced silence of a predator, his senses on fire. He heard the scuttling of rats, the drip of water from a leaky pipe, and then, from a room at the back, a low, guttural cough. He flattened himself against a wall, his gun up, and peered around the doorframe. The room was lit by a single, bare bulb hanging from a wire. The floor was littered with filth, old newspapers, empty bean cans, liquor bottles. On a stained, bare mattress in the corner lay the assassin. Bumpy had expected a monster. A cold, professional killer. What he saw was something far more pathetic, and in a way, more horrifying. The man was skeletal, his skin a waxy, jaundiced yellow. His arms were a roadmap of track marks, some old and scarred, some fresh and weeping. His heavy satchel was open beside him, but instead of holding weapons, it held his works: a spoon, a lighter, a syringe, and a few small glassine bags of heroin. The Southern professional was a dope fiend, and a bad one. He had probably spent most of Genovese's advance on the poison that was slowly killing him. The man coughed again, a wet, rattling sound, and tried to sit up. He saw Bumpy's shadow in the doorway, and his eyes widened in a panic that was less about the gun and more about the interruption. "Who's there?" he rasped, his hand feebly reaching for the pistol that lay on the floor beside him. Bumpy stepped into the light. He didn't raise his gun. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. The man's face went slack with a mixture of terror and dawning recognition. "Johnson," he whispered. "You've been asking about my family," Bumpy said, his voice a dead calm. It was not a question. The man started to shake, a tremor that had nothing to do with withdrawal. "No, listen, man, it was just talk. Just business. I was just trying to get a pattern. That's all. I wouldn't touch no kids. No civilians." He tried to push himself up, but a wave of nausea hit him, and he collapsed back onto the mattress, groaning. Bumpy looked at him, at this wreck of a man rotting from the inside out in a filthy room, willing to murder a stranger for money to buy the very substance that Bumpy himself peddled on the streets of this city. This wasn't a monster from some other world. This was a product of his world. This was the squalor, the moral filth that his own empire was built upon. He was selling the poison that animated this pathetic creature. For the first time, Bumpy saw the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. The violence he projected to build his kingdom had created the very weakness, the very addiction, that Genovese was now using to try and tear it down. The assassin wasn't the disease, he was a symptom. "What's your name?" Bumpy asked. The man blinked, confused. "What? Your name?" Bumpy repeated, his voice still quiet. "Cale. From Georgia." Bumpy nodded slowly. He looked at the heroin, then back at the man. He saw the desperation in Cale's eyes, the hollowed-out soul of an addict who had crossed a line long ago. He felt a wave of disgust so profound it almost choked him. Disgust at this man, at Genovese, at the whole rotten business. And disgust at himself. "You're not going to kill me?" Cale whispered, hope flickering in his sickly eyes. Bumpy's face was unreadable. "No one is going to find you. Cale from Georgia," he said softly. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the man alone with his poison in the suffocating darkness. He didn't need to fire a shot. This man was already dead. His soul was already gone. Bumpy would simply let the city swallow him, another ghost in the machine he had helped create. But the discovery left a foul taste in his mouth. He had come looking for a demon and found a mirror. Assassin number 27 vanished. March 1st to March 15th, 1952, / various locations, Harlem and beyond. The vanishing of Kale the Junkie marked a turning point. The war became colder, more surgical. Bumpy's instructions to his men changed. It was no longer just about elimination. It was about erasure. He wanted to create a legend of disappearance so terrifying that the $75,000 bounty would become a curse. March 3rd, 1952, / a construction site, Queens. An enforcer from Cleveland, a man known as the Hammer, was lured to a late-night meeting at a massive construction project. He thought he was meeting a contact who would get him inside Bumpy's circle. Instead, he met Geechee and his crew. The Hammer was good to his name, a tough man to take down. In the struggle, one of Geechee's younger boys, a kid named Thomas who was barely 19, took a bullet in the shoulder. As Thomas fell, Geechee and the others subdued the Hammer. They didn't kill him there. They bound him, gagged him, and dropped him into a deep concrete form for a support pillar. The next morning, tons of wet cement poured in, entombing him forever inside the foundation of a new library. No body, no evidence, just a story for the wind. Assassin number 32 vanished. While Geechee's crew finished their grim work, Bumpy was in a car, racing through the dark streets. He wasn't thinking about the Hammer. He was thinking about Thomas. Junie was at the wheel, driving with a controlled fury. In the back, Bumpy was holding a wad of cloth against the kid's shoulder, trying to staunch the bleeding. Thomas was pale, his breathing shallow. "He's just a boy, Junie," Bumpy said, his voice tight with a frustration that went beyond the immediate crisis. "A boy who should be in school, not taking bullets for me." "He knew the risks, Bumpy," Junie said, his eyes fixed on the road. "We all do. Knowing the risk doesn't make it right." They arrived at a small, unassuming brownstone in the Bronx, the home of a disgraced doctor who had lost his license years ago, but still kept a full medical kit and a policy of not asking questions. For a price, he would patch up any wound the legitimate hospitals couldn't see. As the doctor worked on Thomas under the glare of a bare bulb, Bumpy stood in the corner, watching. He was confronting the true cost of this war. It wasn't just the lives of his enemies. It was the lives of his own people, of young men like Thomas whose futures were being spent like currency to keep him alive. He had ordered this extraction, and it had nearly cost a boy his life. The weight of that responsibility settled on him, heavier than any prison sentence. The doctor assured him Thomas would live. It was little comfort. March 8th, 1952, / Newark shipping yards. A team of 4 assassins from Boston were tracked to a warehouse near the Newark port. They were arrogant, loud, and confident. Bumpy's men, posing as dock workers, arranged for them to be smuggled into Harlem inside a large shipping crate marked for agricultural machinery. The crate was loaded onto a cargo ship, but its destination wasn't a pier in Manhattan. It was the middle of the Atlantic. Assassins number 33, number 34, number 35, number 36 vanished. March 15th, 1952, / a pig farm, rural New Jersey. The last 2 were particularly vicious. Sicilians, sent directly by Genovese's contacts overseas. They were ghosts, hard to track, but they made one mistake. They got greedy. They tried to shake down one of Bumpy's policy bankers, thinking they could collect a little extra on the side while they hunted the main prize. The banker, a man who owed his life to Bumpy, played along. He set up a meeting at a secluded farm he owned in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. The Sicilians arrived expecting a payoff. Instead, they found Bumpy himself, waiting with Junie and a half-dozen of his best men. There was no fight. There was only a quiet, final conversation. The pigs on that farm were notoriously hungry. Assassins number 38 and number 39 vanished. It was over. By Junie's count, 39 men had come to Harlem to claim the bounty. 39 men had been swallowed by the city, erased from the world. The message to Genovese was clear and terrifying. Harlem was not his for the taking. Bumpy Johnson was not a man to be hunted. The streets were quiet again. The wolves were gone. But the war had left its scars. March 16th, 1952/11 p.m./Bumpy's office. The map on the wall was clean. All the red pins had been removed. The war was won. The silence in the office was absolute, broken only by the faint sounds of the city below. Bumpy sat behind his desk, a bottle of whiskey and a single glass before him. He hadn't touched it. He just stared at the wall, at the empty space where the map of his battlefield had been. The threat was gone, but the adrenaline, the hypervigilance, the coiled readiness to kill or be killed, remained. He couldn't switch it off. His body was still at war, but the enemy had vanished. The feeling was like standing on a cliff edge after a hurricane. The wind gone, but the ground beneath his feet threatening to give way. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the violence he had unleashed. He thought of the faces. The arrogant punk from Jersey. The pathetic junkie, Cale. The boy, Thomas, bleeding in the back of his car. The two Sicilians, their eyes wide with disbelief before the end. 39 of them. He had ordered their deaths, their erasure. He had done it to protect his family, to protect his home. It was necessary. It was justified. But the justification did nothing to quiet the ghosts that now sat with him in the empty room. For 3 days and 3 nights, he barely moved. Junie brought him food he didn't eat and coffee he didn't drink. He just sat, locked in a waking nightmare. It was a withdrawal, not from a drug, but from the savage intensity of the hunt. He had stared into the abyss of his own capacity for violence, and now he couldn't look away. He had protected his family by becoming a more efficient, more ruthless monster than the one sent to kill him. The victory felt like a profound defeat. Witness testimony, Junie Bird. After the last one was gone, I thought he'd be relieved. I thought we'd celebrate. But he just shut down, went up to the office and sat in that chair for 3 days. Didn't say a word. I'd go in, and he'd be looking at the wall like it was showing him a movie of everything that had happened. He won the war, but it looked like it cost him his soul. The quiet in that room was louder than all the gunshots. It was the sound of a man reckoning with what he'd done. Not regretting it, no. Bumpy never regretted protecting his own, but reckoning with it, seeing the price. And the price was a piece of himself. On the 3rd night, the door to the office opened. It wasn't Junie. It was Mamie. She walked in, her presence filling the room with a quiet strength that cut through the stale air of whiskey and despair. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked to the window and opened it, letting in the cool night air and the sounds of Harlem. She turned to him. "It's over, Ellsworth." "Is it?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Genovese is still out there. There will always be another bounty. Another war. Next time, I might not be so lucky. Next time, they might get to you. Or to Elise." "So what do you do?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Do you just sit in this room forever? Do you turn our home into a fortress and Elise into a prisoner?" He had no answer. He had won the battle, but he saw now that he could never win the war. As long as he was the king of Harlem, his family would be the primary target. His crown was a bullseye painted on their backs. "There's another way," Mamie said softly. She came and stood beside his desk, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was the first human contact he had truly felt in days. "The feds. They've been building a case. The conspiracy charge. Junie told me." Bumpy looked up at her, shocked. "Prison. A strategic retreat," she said, her voice firm. "You go away. The target disappears. Genovese can't put a bounty on a man in a federal penitentiary. The war ends because the king is off the board. You'd be safe. And because you're safe, we'd be safe." The idea was insane. To voluntarily surrender his freedom, his kingdom. To walk into a cage. But as he looked at Mamie's face, at the lines of worry that the past month had carved around her eyes, he saw the devastating logic of it. The only way to truly save his family was to leave them. The only way to remove the threat was to remove himself. It was a kind of death, a living death, but it was a solution. It was the one move Genovese would never see coming. A king abdicating his throne to save his queen and his princess. He finally reached for the whiskey bottle, but not to pour a drink for himself. He poured a little into the soil of the potted plant on his windowsill, a silent offering to the ghosts. "Alcatraz," he said, the word tasting like rust. "They'll send me to Alcatraz." Mamie nodded, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. "And we will wait for you. Elise will wait for her father. And you will come home. In the quiet of the office, surrounded by the ghosts of 39 vanished men, Bumpy Johnson made his choice. He would not be brought down by a rival's bullet. He would sacrifice himself. It was the last, most desperate, and most powerful move a king could make. November 5, 1952/U.S. District Court, Foley Square. The judge's voice droned on, a river of legal jargon that Bumpy barely heard. He stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of indifference. He had accepted the deal, pled guilty to conspiracy to traffic narcotics. The feds got their high-profile conviction. The newspapers got their headline. Harlem kingpin toppled Genovese from his throne downtown, likely smiled, thinking he had won by default. They were all wrong. This wasn't a defeat. It was a calculated sacrifice. 15 years, the judge said, the words echoing in the cavernous courtroom. To be served at the United States Penitentiary, Alcatraz. He glanced over his shoulder. Mamie was sitting in the front row, her face pale but composed, a pillar of grace in a hostile world. Elise wasn't there. He had forbidden it. He didn't want her last memory of him for a decade to be of him in handcuffs. June 12, 1953/USP Alcatraz, Cell Block D. The cold was the first thing he noticed. A damp, bone-deep cold that seeped through the stone walls, carried on the ceaseless wind howling across the San Francisco Bay. It was a cold that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the absence of hope. His kingdom of Harlem, with its vibrant life and pulsing energy, had been replaced by a 5 by 9 foot concrete box. He was no longer Bumpy Johnson. He was inmate number 1117. His reputation had preceded him. The other convicts, men who were legends in their own right, Machine Gun Kelly, Al Capone in his final, dementia-addled years, gave him a wide berth. The guards watched him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. But in here, power was an illusion. All he had were routines, rules, and time. An ocean of it. October 2nd, 1955/letter from Mamie. My dearest Ellsworth. I hope this letter finds you well, or as well as can be. The days are getting shorter here. I miss your presence in the evenings. The house is too quiet. Elise is doing wonderfully in school. Her teacher, Mrs. Gable, says she is the brightest child in her class. She reads everything she can get her hands on. Last week, she brought home a book about kings and castles. She told me, "My daddy is a king." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She misses you terribly. She keeps the photograph of you from her birthday on her nightstand and talks to it before she goes to sleep. Junie is managing things. He keeps the peace, as you instructed. He ensures we want for nothing. He is a good and loyal man. Harlem is different without you. Quieter. The wolves from downtown are keeping their distance, just as you predicted. Your move worked. We are safe. I have enclosed a new picture of Elise. She lost her first tooth. She was so proud. All my love, forever, Mamie. Bumpy held the small, black and white photograph in his hand, his thumb stroking the image of his daughter's gap-toothed smile. He sat on the edge of his cot, the cold of the concrete seeping into him. In the photo, Elise was holding up a copy of Grimm's fairy tales. A king. He had traded his kingdom for this cage, and for this small, priceless picture. He closed his eyes and committed every detail of her face to memory. It was the only treasure he had left. July 20th, 1958/letter from Mamie. Ellsworth. Elise had her first dance recital last night. She was a butterfly. So graceful. I wish you could have seen her. The whole church was there. I saved you a program. She has your confidence, you know. When she is on that stage, she is not afraid of anything. I think of you every day. I imagine you looking out at the water, and I look out our window at the city, and I feel like we are looking at each other across a great distance. 10 years felt like a lifetime when you left. Now it feels closer. We are counting the days. Love, Mamie. He read the letters until they fell apart, taping them back together with paste he made from bread. They were his lifeline, his connection to the world he had given up. He worked in the laundry, the steam and heat a stark contrast to the cell block's chill. He read books from the library, philosophy, history, poetry. He learned the patience of stone. He watched men break around him, driven mad by the monotony and isolation. He refused to break. He had a reason to endure. Her name was Elise. September 5th, 1961/letter from Mamie. My love. She is a teenager now. Can you believe it? She is beautiful and stubborn and smarter than I ever was. She argues with me about politics and civil rights. She has such a fire in her. Your fire. She asked about you the other day. Really asked. Not just, when is daddy coming home? But who you are. What you did. I told her you were a man who loved his family so much. You were willing to do anything to protect them. I told her you were a complicated man in a complicated world. I think she understood. The parole board meets in 6 months. We are praying. Forever yours, Mamie. A teenager. The little girl with the gap-toothed smile was a young woman. He had missed it all. The first days of school, the scraped knees, the heartbreaks, the triumphs. He had experienced his daughter's entire childhood through photographs and ink on paper. The cost of his choice, the sheer weight of the lost years, settled on him. He walked out into the yard, the wind whipping off the bay, and looked toward the distant lights of San Francisco. He had made a promise to come home. The end of his sentence was a faint light on the horizon, and he steered his entire being toward it. He had survived the assassins. He had survived Genovese. He would survive this. February 21st, 1963/8 a.m. Alcatraz Ferry Dock, San Francisco. The ferry bumped against the dock with a gentle thud. For 10 years, that sound had meant new arrivals, fresh fish for the rock. Today, it meant freedom. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson walked down the gangplank, a free man. He wore a simple, ill-fitting suit provided by the prison, a stark contrast to the tailored finery he once favored. He was 57 years old. His face was leaner, etched with the deep lines of a decade spent in quiet contemplation. His hair was threaded with gray, but his eyes, as they scanned the small crowd on the pier, were the same, sharp, intelligent, and heavy with the weight of all he had seen. A figure detached from the crowd and walked toward him. It was Junie Bird, older too, his hair more salt than pepper, but his posture was still that of a loyal soldier. He stopped a few feet from Bumpy. No handshake, no hug. They just looked at each other, a decade of unspoken history passing between them in a single, silent moment. "Boss," Junie said, his voice thick with emotion. It was the first time he had used the title in 10 years. "Junie," Bumpy replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "You look distinguished. And you look tired," Junie said. "Let's go home." The flight to New York was a blur of clouds and engine drone. Bumpy stared out the window, watching America scroll by beneath him. The world had changed. He had read about it in newspapers and magazines, the burgeoning civil rights movement, a new president named Kennedy, the shifting landscape of the city. He was returning not as a king to his kingdom, but as a ghost to a place he barely recognized. The car ride from the airport into Harlem was even more disorienting. New buildings stood where old landmarks had been. The energy on the streets felt different, charged with a new kind of hope and a new kind of anger. Junie was quiet, letting Bumpy absorb it all. The car finally pulled up to the curb in front of the brownstone on St. Nicholas Avenue. It looked exactly the same. The black iron fence, the polished front door, the roses Mamie kept in the window boxes. For a moment, Bumpy couldn't move. He was more terrified to walk through that door than he had ever been facing Genovese's assassins. In prison, his family had been an idea, a perfect memory preserved in photographs. Now they were real, and he was a stranger. Junie gave him a nod. "They're waiting for you." Bumpy took a deep breath and got out of the car. He walked up the stone steps, his legs feeling unsteady. He raised his hand to knock, but the door swung open before his knuckles could touch the wood. Mamie stood there. She was older, her face a beautiful map of the years of worry and waiting, but her eyes were the same. They held the same unwavering love and strength that had been his anchor in the storm. She didn't say a word. She just opened her arms, and he stepped into her embrace, burying his face in her hair. He was home. Over her shoulder, he saw a young woman standing at the foot of the staircase. She was tall and slender, with his eyes and Mamie's grace. She clutched a book to her chest, watching him with an expression of intense, cautious curiosity. This was Elise, the gap-toothed girl, the butterfly in the dance recital, the teenager with fire in her eyes. She was a woman now, a stranger. He and Mamie separated, though she kept a hand on his arm, as if afraid he might vanish. He looked at his daughter, his heart a painful knot in his chest. What could he say? I'm sorry I missed everything. I did it for you. The words felt hollow, inadequate to bridge the chasm of 10 lost years. Elise took a hesitant step forward, then another. She stopped right in front of him, her eyes searching his face, looking for the father she only knew from stories and faded pictures. He saw a flicker of the little girl she had been and the strong woman she had become. He had paid a decade of his life for this moment, for her to be standing here, safe and whole. He braced himself for judgment, for anger, for the cold distance of a stranger. Instead, her face softened. The cautious curiosity melted away, replaced by a wave of recognition so profound it was like a physical impact. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her lips. She dropped her book on the floor, took the final step, and wrapped her arms around his neck, holding him tight. He was momentarily frozen, shocked by the simple, unconditional acceptance of it. He slowly brought his own arms up, holding his daughter for the first time in a decade. She leaned back slightly, her eyes shining with tears. She didn't see inmate number 1117. She didn't see the feared godfather of Harlem. She didn't see the man who had made 39 men vanish. She saw the king from her storybooks, the man from the photograph by her bed. "Welcome home, Pop," she whispered. And in that moment, the cost was tallied, the debt was paid, and the king, stripped of his crown and his kingdom, finally found his true legacy.